When I moved to Savannah, Georgia, I didn't know what to expect. I had spent my whole life in Greenville, South Carolina, but I knew I needed a change. A job opportunity at a packaging factory came through someone I knew, and when they called to offer me the position, I didn't think twice. It was a fresh start, and I packed up my life and left for Savannah. Settling in a new city wasn't easy. I couldn't afford much, so I found a small house for rent. It wasn't glamorous. It sat in the backyard of a family's property, and while the houses were separate, the wall dividing them was low enough to make us neighbors in every sense of the word. I didn't know it then, but moving into that house would change my life forever. The family in the front house welcomed me warmly. Over time, I got to know them and became good friends, especially with Carl, their 25-year-old son who was my age. Carl had a younger sister named Catherine, who used a wheelchair. I remember the first time I met her. She was sitting outside, basking in the sunlight, her headphones on, lost in her own world. She had this quiet beauty about her, but what struck me most was the sadness in her eyes. As I got to know the family, I learned more about Catherine's story. She hadn't always been in a wheelchair. Carl told me about the day it all began, a morning like any other, until it wasn't. Hearing her story broke my heart, but it also made me admire her resilience. Little did I know that Catherine and I were about to form a bond that would change us both. Every morning, as I left for work, I would see Catherine sitting at the gate. She loved soaking in the sun, often with her headphones on and a faint smile. I'd always say a quick hello, and she'd politely reply, but there was always a distance in her voice. At first, I thought she preferred to be left alone, but over time, I felt compelled to talk to her more. Something about her seemed to call out for connection. One day, I struck up a proper conversation. I asked her about the music she liked, and her face lit up as she began to talk about her favorite bands and songs. That was the first time I saw a spark of excitement in her eyes, and it was infectious. When I mentioned that I played the guitar, she told me she'd always wanted to learn. That's how it started, our daily conversations turning into impromptu guitar lessons. Catherine was a natural. Despite her physical limitations, she was determined, and her passion for learning was inspiring. I brought her a simple acoustic guitar, and from the first lesson, she picked up chords with ease. Teaching her wasn't just fun. It gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time, I felt like I was making a difference in someone's life. Her family noticed the change in her demeanor, too. Her mother once pulled me aside and said, "You've done more for her than you realize." It's been so long since I've seen her this happy. Hearing that meant everything to me. I didn't know it yet, but those little moments of connection were the foundation of something much deeper. What started as casual conversations and guitar lessons quickly turned into something more. Catherine and I began spending almost every evening together, talking about music, life, and her dreams. It was impossible not to notice the way she looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Before long, I found myself looking at her the same way. One evening, after we'd spent hours playing guitar and laughing, the mood shifted. The laughter faded, and the silence between us was filled with a tension I couldn't ignore. When I leaned in, she didn't pull away. That kiss was the moment everything changed. It was as if all the sadness she had carried melted away, replaced by hope and happiness. I was in love, and it was clear she felt the same. We decided to keep our relationship a secret at first, unsure how her family would react. But as the days turned into weeks, it became harder to hide. The moments we shared were too beautiful to keep in the shadows. When we finally told her family, I was nervous, but their reaction surprised me. They were thrilled. Catherine's mom hugged me tightly and said, "You've brought my daughter back to life." Our relationship transformed both of us. I had always been a quiet, reserved person, but Catherine made me feel brave and alive. For her, I was more than just a boyfriend. I was someone who saw her for who she truly was, not for what she had lost. For the first time in years, she started to believe in the possibility of a brighter future, and so did I. A year into our relationship, Catherine and I had built a life together that felt full of promise. We had dreams of a future that didn't feel constrained by her wheelchair or her past. Then one day, she received a call that would change everything. A clinic in Chicago wanted to review her case, offering a glimmer of hope that she might walk again. I remember the day she told me. Her excitement was infectious, but I couldn't help feeling apprehensive. Catherine had endured so much disappointment from specialists in the past. What if this was just another dead end? But her hope was unwavering, and I couldn't let my fears cloud her excitement. So, I took a few days off work to accompany her. The tests in Chicago were grueling. Catherine met with a specialist who reviewed her case and conducted a series of scans and examinations. Finally, after hours of waiting, we get the news. The doctor had identified a small anomaly in her spine, a tiny issue that might be fixable with surgery. It wasn't a guarantee, but for the first time in years, Catherine had a real chance at regaining her mobility. The following months were a whirlwind. Catherine underwent 2 surgeries, each more taxing than the last. After the second one, the doctor told us that recovery would be slow and uncertain. The nerves might heal, but there were no promises. It was a delicate balance of hope and caution, but Catherine's determination never wavered. 3 months later, the impossible happened. She moved her toes. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. A few weeks after that, she could wiggle her legs. Her recovery accelerated, and soon she was standing with crutches, then walking short distances unaided. Seeing her stand on her own for the first time brought tears to my eyes. It was as though all our hopes and prayers had finally been answered. We celebrated her progress with her family, and for a while, everything felt perfect. Catherine had regained a part of herself that she thought was lost forever, and I was proud to have been by her side through it all. But little did I know, this triumph would also mark the beginning of the end for us. For a time, everything seemed perfect. Catherine's recovery had brought a new light into her life, and I was proud to be by her side through it all. But as she regained her independence, things between us began to change. At first, it was subtle, shorter conversations, fewer shared moments. Then it became clear Catherine was growing distant. She started spending more time with her old friends, reconnecting with people from her past. One of them, Marcella, stood out. Marcella was outgoing and full of energy, always talking about her college adventures and her ambitious plans. She'd casually bring up Catherine's ex-boyfriends, which stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't long before Catherine seemed to thrive in this new social dynamic, and I began to feel like an outsider in her life. When I finally confronted her, I wasn't prepared for what she had to say. She told me she needed to move on, not just from me, but from the life we had built together. "Nelson," she said, her voice trembling, "you're an amazing person, and I'll always be grateful for everything you've done for me. But I've spent so much time feeling trapped in my wheelchair, trapped in my circumstances. Now that I've regained my freedom, I need to live. I need to explore, go to college, and figure out who I am on my own. And I can't do that while feeling tied down." Her words cut deep, but I couldn't argue with her. I had seen how much she had changed, how much she had grown, and part of me understood. Still, it didn't make the heartbreak any easier. I smiled through the pain and said, "I understand, Catherine. If this is what you need, I won't stop you. Just know that everything I did because I cared for you." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. We both knew this was goodbye. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Her parents, who had always treated me like family, were embarrassed and apologetic. Her father told me he never thought Catherine would leave me after everything we'd been through. Her mother still brought me coffee and cake, but it wasn't the same. The house I had come to call home no longer felt like it. It wasn't long before I made the decision to leave. Staying there, surrounded by memories of Catherine, was unbearable. I packed up my things and moved back to South Carolina, determined to start over once again. Starting over in South Carolina felt like déjà vu, but this time I carried a heavier heart. I moved to Charleston and found a new job, throwing myself into work to distract from the pain. It wasn't easy to let go of the memories I had with Catherine, but I knew it was the only way to heal. Carl, Catherine's brother, and I stayed in touch. Every so often, he'd call or send a message, checking in to see how I was doing. He told me Catherine was doing well. She had enrolled in college and seemed happy. I even learned through Carl that she had a boyfriend and was expecting her first child. It stung to hear, but I realized I no longer felt bitterness, only a strange sense of closure. Catherine had moved on, and I was learning to do the same. Reflecting on our time together, I realized that Catherine had taught me as much as I had taught her. Through her, I learned what it meant to give selflessly, to love without expectation, and to grow through adversity. Our relationship, though painful in the end, shaped me into a stronger, more compassionate person. Now I've built a life for myself in Charleston, a life that's entirely my own. I still play guitar, but now it's for me. I've even made new friends and found joy in little things I once overlooked. The pain has faded, replaced by gratitude for the lessons I've learned. To anyone listening to this story, thank you for letting me share it. Life doesn't always go as planned, but every twist and turn teaches us something. If you've ever experienced heartbreak, know that it's not the end. It's just a new chapter waiting to be written. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for being part of my journey.